How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Wednesday, September 4th, just one day away, one more sleep away from the start of the NFL regular season. We're going to talk about those games a lot more in depth over the next coming days, but on today's show, I wanted to bring up some breaking news and some discussions, some early season awards that we have on stand for today's show. With that breaking news yesterday, Trent Williams and Cam Heyward getting new deals. We're going to start off the show by talking about that, what kind of contracts they got and their impact. Then, an interesting interview came out regarding Stefon Diggs, talking about how things broke out last year between the Bills and how it all, came to wraps at the end of that year and what led to him signing with the Houston Texans. Those will be the first two segments we get to, plus all the other topics that I mentioned in the later portion of the show. So make sure to stick around to tune into those segments. But before we get started, if you guys ever have any questions or comments or want to share any opinion during the show, please don't hesitate to share any input or any feedback that you guys have regarding anything I say or on any of the topics we cover on today's show. Whether it's a quick comment, thoughtful question, or opinion, just share it with us and don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and features on the show, there's an easy way to do that now. Use the super chat feature that we have available for you guys. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. It's also a fantastic way to continue to support our channel and the sports content that we love bringing to you guys each and every day. And also, just make sure to go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the super chat button again, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting and conversational as possible. But there's also still that alternative option. You still can use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, to leave a question or comment there if you prefer. We couldn't do this show and this entire channel without your guys' amazing support, and we're always so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. So please get involved and let us know what you guys are thinking. But now we can jump into some of the bigger news from yesterday, just some breaking news that we had. Two new contracts for two of the most reliable, loyal kind of guys, crucial cornerstone pieces that we have in the NFL, right? Because we're talking about Trent Williams and Cam Heyward. Yesterday, we got those two announcements on the new contracts for two of the top players in their positions. Trent Williams, first and foremost, came to terms on a new restructuring of his contract, not an extension. He's still under contract for the next 3 years, including this one. So he's just restructuring his deal. I'm going to provide more details on that in just a moment. But also, the Steelers and their longtime veteran defensive tackle, Cam Heyward, they agreed to a new contract extension, keeping Cam Heyward with the Steelers until the 2027 season, technically, because he's signed through 2026. So first off, starting with Trent, I think because this one was more of a story over the last few days, talking about making it to the start of the regular season, potentially missing that first game against the New York Jets. All of that came to an end. Officially, Trent Williams put an end to his offseason long holdout to come back just in time to play against the New York Jets. And this new contract that he got, Trent Williams, again, still has 3 years left on his current contract. They just changed some of the terms around, and the biggest thing with Trent was that because he is 35 years old now, if I'm not mistaken, the guaranteed money is a huge thing. Obviously, that's a massive thing with any contract, but when you're a veteran, and we're talking about a different level, honestly, right? Talking about Trent Williams at his position for the 49ers, they need that guaranteed money, and I don't think anybody really blamed him for staying away until he got his guaranteed money, right? But now, instead of his old contract being a 3-year, $77 million remaining amount left on that deal, it is now a brand new 3-year, $82 million deal with $48 million due at signing, plus a $25 million signing bonus as well. Trent Williams is set to make $27.65 million in cash this season, which will be the most of any offensive lineman in the NFL. Now getting to that guaranteed money, $103 million guaranteed, which would mean that is the most guaranteed money for any offensive lineman since 2021. And just to throw it out at you guys as well, in his career, Trent Williams has made almost $360 million in career earnings. And like I said before, I don't think anybody is really questioning whether or not he deserves it. He pretty much deserves every penny of that, if we're being honest, for getting traded to the 49ers, and then ever since then, being a huge part of what makes that offense so dominant, with still being so athletic, being the full package at left tackle, offensive tackle just in general. When you think of the epitome of that position, right away people bring up Trent Williams as arguably one of the best players in general that the 49ers have on their roster. But obviously that's a lot of money, right? I just threw out a lot of numbers at you guys, and it makes you question a little bit of what the negotiations will be with Deebo Samuel or Brock Purdy in the future, right? Because Brock's going to make a ton of money as well. But the 49ers kept busy. Right after this deal with Trent Williams, they also restructured Deebo Samuel's contract, creating an additional $16.4 million in cap space. Deebo Samuel was scheduled to make $20 million in base salary this season with a $28 million cap hit. So the details on how the 49ers kind of moved everything around, I couldn't find it. I didn't see it when I was preparing for the segment, so I'm sure it's out there. But for right now, that's the end result. They created additional cap space, which all of that wrapped into Brandon Ayuk, being available for them, signing that extension, and having all these pieces now right before the season. Nothing could have gone better for the 49ers, honestly, right? So that's great for them. Great for Trent Williams for getting that money. But also, now moving on to the other veteran player to get his extension, Cam Heyward. He actually got an extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers, coming to terms on a 3-year, $45 million deal, $29 million in new money, plus $16 million guaranteed. That would be $16 million guaranteed for 2024. And this was one of the bigger contracts, one of the bigger subjects that the Steelers still had to check off their to-do list. It was Cam Heyward and his extension, Pat Freiermuth as well, and Najee Harris. The Steelers declined the 5th-year option on Najee Harris's contract, so he is now in the final year of his deal. Same thing with Pat Freiermuth. He was drafted in the 2nd round, so he does not have a 5th-year option. And also, those two guys are still left to be extended. Just some questions here. Eric Fortis Jr., Henry Ayuk or Marvin Harrison Jr. or Pacheco. I'm assuming, which side do you prefer? Oh, okay, I see. Henry Ayuk, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Pacheco. I'm assuming this is a fantasy question. I'm assuming. If it is a fantasy question, I would say give me Henry and Ayuk in that scenario for fantasy. But if we're just talking duos, who do I prefer? I would probably still go with Derrick Henry and Brandon Ayuk, just for the fact that I need to see Marvin Harrison. I know he's going to be good. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be great. But I still need to see it in the Cardinals offense for me to really believe it. And Isaiah Pacheco, same thing. I think they spread the ball around too much. Where Derek, I know he's going to get the ball almost every drive. Same thing with Brandon. So that's what I would say for that question. But sticking with Cam Heyward and the Steelers, getting this deal done, it is huge just because they usually don't do this during the regular season. So it is significant to do it now. And now he's under contract through 2026. And also because of that, Cam Heyward mentioned that he wanted to play 3 more years. This deal allows him to do that. And also, he really wanted to retire just playing for one team, ideally, obviously, the Steelers. So also now leads you to believe that he will be retiring with the Steelers. There's no way he plays beyond 2026 already, so that is great news for the Steelers, and also bringing back in Trent Williams. Overall, the census, the main takeaway I took from both of these, it just shows the value that both players carry, regardless of any thoughts of age. Are they getting up there? Are they past their primes? No one's thinking about that, at least no one on the players, coaches side of things, right? I heard some criticism for this deal from the Steelers side of, giving this extension to a 35-year-old Cam Heyward. But again, I think from the players side, what they bring to the team, and still, it's not like they're bums now, like they're not going to contribute anything. They still, I believe, have a year or two left to give at their position. So I think they find value, obviously, from the players and coaches side. So I would also agree with that sentiment as well. And also, to add on to that, a similar point, you're looking at the left tackle position, the defensive tackle position, two of the highest paid positions in the NFL. And it shows, again, why these two spots are two of the highest in the NFL, right? Guys like these don't come around so often, so you have teams desperate to still keep them on their team at 35 years old if you're Cam Heyward, at 36 years old if you're Trent Williams. That age thing just isn't really a factor too much when you have guys like these, and it shows why they're being paid this much and why, again, teams want to have them on their team regardless of a veteran status right now, right? Teams and executives, general managers are all looking past that. They believe that they can play up until this level, and again, it just deserving contracts for both of these guys. I think I heard Trent Williams say that he wanted to play till 40 or something like that, which is nuts. But I'm not doubting Trent Williams. If he wants to play till 40, the 49ers, I'm sure, would gladly keep him there. It doesn't look like he's missed a step or is in any threat of missing a step going forward. So best of luck to Trent Williams. Great for the 49ers and the Steelers to get these deals done. But that's it on the contract talk for this episode. Yeah, that is it. But the next segment we're going to talk about after the break, we're going to bring up Stefon Diggs. In a recent interview with GQ Sports, he brought up last year how it all broke down, the criticism he received, and not pointing the finger, but just asking people to look into it a little bit deeper and then come back with a better answer than just criticizing him for the downfall of the Bills, right? We're going to unpack all of that when we return after our first break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping right back into the action right away in this second segment, a very interesting one that I saw just yesterday, and I had to bring it up. I had to bring it up here because I thought that it was very revealing and a very honest answer from Stefon Diggs. He recently spoke in a recent interview with Clay Skipper of GQ Sports to discuss a bunch of things, right, in that article: being traded, the criticism he received last year, and a new start in Houston, obviously. And one of the points that Stefon Diggs made went in on about his dip in production last year, right, for the Buffalo Bills in the second half of the year. Started off great, started off in a fantastic way, but the Bills weren't necessarily succeeding at that point in the season, right? They had a very rough start to the year. There were some questions offensively. I'm sure some going to Josh Allen, I'm sure. But Stefon Diggs was firing on all cylinders, but the team didn't look great right off of the bat. And then in the second half of the year, when the dip in production started happening for Stefon Diggs, that's when you started seeing some of the sideline outbursts, or actually, I shouldn't say right after that. It was in the lead up to that, the frustrations boiling over on the sidelines. I'm sure we saw that, the close losses, just losses in general. Not what the Bills were made up of last year, with Stefon, Josh, and all the great players that they have. Losing the amount of games that they did in the first half of the year from weeks 1 through 9 was just unacceptable. And then you saw, the reactions on the sidelines, the interaction between Josh and Stefon Diggs. Then you started seeing more and more as we creeped now into the second half of the year that there was more rumors about trades or this being the potential last year for Stefon Diggs in Buffalo because of how bad it got to one point. And now, it ultimately ended up coming into fruition, right? Stefon Diggs was traded. He ends up in Houston, probably the best team to get traded to, honestly, probably outside of the Chiefs, right? If we're talking about creating this super team, the Houston Texans are right up there with any team in the NFL. So he now had an opportunity to talk about it, and he went into all those topics that I mentioned at the start, but there was one statement that he made that I think was very direct, but in the most indirect way possible, right? Like most answers come from athletes, right? And this is what he said. This was a pretty long-winded comment, so try to stay with me as best as possible, but also you could just read it yourself. He said, but pay attention. Pay real close attention. Watch the game. Of course, there's plenty of plays I want back, but there's a lot of plays that didn't go my way. I need a lot of things to go right to get the ball. You can't roll out of bed and get 800 yards in the first 8 games. Your best receiver's doing that. You tell me about the last 10. What changed? Were there changes going on? I just pay attention to what really happened and not what people try to act like happened. And right, he points out to a lot of specific things, right, mentioning week 10, the changes basically going on. And if you are unaware of those changes, right, like I mentioned, for the first half of the season, to give you a little bit of context, the first 9 games for Stefon Diggs were phenomenal. 70 receptions, 834 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 4 out of the 5 games that he had at one point at the beginning of the season, he went for 100-plus yards in those games. So great numbers. 70 receptions, almost 1,000 yards through those first 9 games is insane. But the Bills were struggling, right? Ultimately, and at the end of the day, they were struggling. It wasn't looking so smooth. They were losing games, and something had to be done about it. And right away, you're not going to make a trade or anything like that for Stefon Diggs in the middle of the season, right? So after week 9, in that transition of week 10 and into the second half of the year, the Bills decided to fire their old offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, and they transitioned over to their new and current offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, which in that whole change, you saw how their approach changed as well, right? Their strategy, the way they approached games, the emphasis on what portion of the offense really was what stood out. They really went more to a run-heavy offense, focusing more on not getting the ball out of Josh's hands, because it's not like they don't want their best player to have the ball, but more so having him not to do everything right with the football, right? Not being so dependent on him, throwing it 40 to 50 times a game, having the other players help you, because they do have talented players. And from that point on, from week 10 going on to the rest of the year, the Bills won the next 6 out of their final 7 games with more of a run-heavy offense, like I mentioned, and again, after firing their old offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey. And again, from that point on, it's great. They're winning games. They won basically every single one of their games except one. They won the division. They had a home game in the playoffs. They won that game against the Steelers. And you would think that it all played out as you would, right? You find that change in the middle, second half of the year, and you ride that momentum into the playoffs. And you had a chance to beat the Chiefs in that game as well. But now is when we focus more on Stefon Diggs, right? Because after that change from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady, from week 10 to the rest of the year, he had almost 1,000 yards, right, in the first 9 games, still with about 7 games left to go in the second half of the year, obviously. So you're thinking, like, this guy could end up with almost 3,000 or 2,000 yards, right? But in that second half of the year, he finished with 37 receptions, 349 yards, and only 1 touchdown after that transition from Joe Brady. And you look at the changes that materialized from Ken Dorsey over to Joe Brady, and you look at through the first 10 weeks with Ken Dorsey, James Cook, their running back, he was 20th in the NFL in carries that he got overall. But then once the change was made, James Cook jumped up to 10th in the NFL from weeks 11 through 18 with Joe Brady. Also, Josh Allen went from second in the NFL in passing attempts through the first 10 weeks. Again, with Ken Dorsey, once he's fired and Joe Brady comes in, he drops down all the way to 15th after Joe Brady was hired and in that second half of the year. Drastic changes, obviously, right? Involving the running game a lot more and using a lot less of Josh Allen's arm just necessarily. So that on top of also Stefon Diggs, he averaged almost 11 targets per game through the first 9 weeks, but once Joe Brady came in, those targets dropped to 7.9 per game in the final 8 games. And not to mention just that, but not only the targets going down, so you're almost forced to be a little bit more efficient when the ball comes your way, right? You don't have as many chances, so you have to take advantage of as many as those looks as you can get. But Diggs struggled with drops and only caught pretty much 58% of his targets with Joe Brady compared to catching the 71% with Ken Dorsey. So there was a little bit there from Stefon Diggs, adjusting to the change. You can sort of imagine, just putting myself in Stefon Diggs' shoes, not knowing as much when you're going to get the ball, making this transition to a new offensive coordinator, which, again, doesn't always suit everybody. When it looks like Josh Allen is looking great, James Cook is looking fantastic, Dalton Kincaid is another one that benefited from this change. A lot of times it doesn't benefit every single one of the players, and Stefon Diggs seemed to be one that just kind of got lost in the transition a little bit. He still did all right. He's still a wide receiver 1, but compared to these other guys, I think it was just more of a case that Brady and the Buffalo Bills discovered that using the run would help them more and would help Josh Allen become more efficient rather than putting up these crazy numbers in the passing game, but still ultimately losing, right? This game's about wins and losses. This benefited the team, but of course, it hurt Diggs production-wise from that second half of the year moving on. And all of that really came with a lot of criticism to Stefon Diggs, especially following the Chiefs game, which culminated everything, right? Because up until that point, you look at the production and people think, like, Stefon Diggs, he's lost the step already, right? It's crazy to think about that people criticize Stefon Diggs from weeks 1 through 9. No one said anything, but then just in a matter of a week from the second half of the year, all that criticism just hit so emphatically, and now people are bringing up the idea that he's lost the step. Maybe he's not a wide receiver 1 anymore because of the production in that second half of the year when the Bills were winning, but Stefon Diggs necessarily wasn't contributing as much as he did. And with everything that I brought up, you could see that necessarily, wasn't his fault. All that criticism led to also Stefon Diggs mentioning in this interview, in quotes, he said, "Last year, I was in the worst mental space I've been in since I've been in the league." And, that's what comes with the criticism. He doesn't really strike me as a guy who really pay too much attention to it, but at some point, there was another statement that I couldn't include because he used some very strong words in that, so I couldn't include it. But it got to a point just really where Stefon just pretty much had enough. He even said that in Buffalo and also in Minnesota, going back to his time there, that in both scenarios that he was the one that decided to move on. He was the one that decided that it was time to move on, that he just wanted to shake things up for his mental state, obviously, and also just probably seeing that things weren't working out. So now we're here, now we're with Houston, and really, to me, having all these doubts, all these criticisms, hearing everybody talk about him, now being in this situation with Houston, it kind of makes me think that people are sleeping on Stefon Diggs a little bit. He could be a sneaky, relatable term just in terms of producing those wide receiver 1 numbers, right? I don't think he's going to produce like he did in Buffalo, but I think people are sleeping on him in a sense that they don't think he's going to contribute like 900 or 800 yards. People might think he's, done and dusted. He's past that now, but I think Houston gives him an opportunity to kind of have this rebound season from last year. A lot of the attention, rightly so, will go to Nico, to Tank. CJ Stroud's going to be distributing the ball everywhere, Joe Mixon, but I think now it will benefit Stefon Diggs a little bit more when you have and you're able to play against or with these talented players just on your team. Having them there help you out. Tank Dell mentioned it on a recent episode of the Pivot podcast where, teams just can't double every single one of them. It's impossible to do that. Now, if they decide to double Stefon Diggs right at the start just because he is the veteran, that's fine. But how long is that going to last until Tank is going off, doing his thing, having a good run of games where he's, just popping off? And then you have Nico Collins, same thing. He might take it for a couple weeks. And then Stefon Diggs in the process might get better looks, and he'll start producing again, kind of reminding everybody that, this is still Stefon Diggs. It's not just any ordinary receiver. This is one of the best that we've seen over the last few years. And I think now in this situation with Houston, he has an opportunity, if you guys happen to have him on your fantasy team or something like that, to maybe start him a couple weeks, right? I think with so much talent, it might scare off some people and think that he might not get enough volume, but don't be so sure to just write him off. I think he has an opportunity to, have a rebound season, remind everybody of who he is, and in the process, this Houston team is going to continue to roll in 2024. We're just a day away from the start of the 2024 NFL season, and with that, it leads me perfectly into my next segment. Talking about the season, the start of the season, we can't start the official season without getting into the early season award predictions for the 2024 year. We're going to get into predicting the Offensive Player of the Year, the Defensive Player of the Year, the MVP, the Coach of the Year, all the awards. I'm going to bring it to you guys in this next segment, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk some more anticipation leading up into the 2024 NFL regular season. We couldn't officially start it without predicting how most of this season will go out, and a big part of that will be with the awards that obviously are given out at the end of the year. But we're going to predict all of them. At least I think I got all of them in this segment. Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, Coach of the Year. You guys know the drill with all of these awards. We're going to go through each one of those, and I'll give you guys my take on who will win the award based on my criteria, my just thoughts around it. So we're going to start off talking about the Offensive Player of the Year. I didn't want to go with like Christian McCaffrey or anything like that. I wanted to shake it up a little bit, and I feel like this man that you see on your screen right now, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think he's set up for one of those years, right? I think after last year, he had the best year of his career last year, right, in the NFL. He was up there with CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill in terms of numbers. The Lions are obviously set up to have a great year once again, with St. Brown leading the way, along with Sam Laporta. They're also excited about Jameson Williams finally, stepping into that number 2 wide receiver role, which is all important, right? You can't just have Amon-Ra St. Brown. I haven't even mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery. Even with all those guys on the roster, on the offense, Amon-Ra St. Brown still had an amazing year last year. And also, with that being the case, I feel now that he broke out last year, I'd like this pick. I want to make him this pick because I still feel like there's a drop-off potentially from the elite of the elite receivers, right? I feel like still people don't mention him in the same breath as CeeDee or Tyreek or Devontae Adams, even Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, where numbers-wise, just based off of last year, he's going into now his 4th year in the NFL. I think he's ready to he made the jump last year, putting up, I think, over 1,500 yards, being on the second team All-Pro or something like that. It might not have been the AP one. It was one of them. But I feel like now, after the year he had last year, I think he's only going to continue that. The Lions are set up very well on every facet of their team. Look out for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't really like the situation with the Dallas Cowboys where CeeDee could have got a potential vote here, or Tyreek is another good shout to compete for this award, but I wanted to go bold here. I wanted to throw out a name that you guys probably weren't expecting, so I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. I wanted to draft him in fantasy this year because I was so high on him, but he was stolen from me in the early rounds, but I think he has a good case for Offensive Player of the Year for sure. Then, one of the easier ones in my opinion, one of the gimmies, has to be one of the gimmies, is Defensive Player of the Year. TJ Watt should have won it last year. Another guy not talked about enough, I don't think. I actually, before I got on here live on the show, I saw a comment that one of the McCourty brothers made about TJ Watt, and they were talking about the production, the legendary trajectory that he's on, and they compared him to LeBron James of all people, talking about how now people look at what TJ's doing and they think, oh, that's just TJ, that's what he does. But really, it's not normal for really any player to be doing what he's doing, putting up the numbers that he does, the impact that he has on the Steelers overall. The Steelers are 1-10 when he doesn't play. No other player, I think, other than maybe Patrick or any quarterback of the top 4, top 5, have any sort of record like that. That's like massive, significant impact right there. Your team, the Steelers, just simply don't win when he's not playing. That's how big he affects opposing game plans, how much he affects games, just himself a lot of the times. Not just sacks, but interceptions, forced fumbles, tackles for a loss. He does it all. I think he should have won the award last year. He's going to be one of the favorites again this year, barring any injuries. Really hoping that doesn't happen. But the biggest thing with him, he always seems to make, those big plays in the biggest moments, whether it is a strip sack or jumping a route on a comeback route against the Los Angeles Rams last year, looking like a defensive back out there. He does it all for this team. He is the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, pretty much being the captain and producing so much for them and bringing so much good to the Steelers. So I think he should be one of the heavy favorites for this award, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't give it to him. Miles is a good option as well. Micah Parsons is in there. But in terms of impact, I don't think either of them really make as much as TJ Watt. So that's my defensive player of the year in 2024. Then another gimme, this one a bit more agreeable, I think, with everyone. I think it's going to be Aaron Rodgers, again, barring any injury to that leg or not looking like himself because of the uneasiness from that injury. I think this award's pretty much his for the taking with how good the Jets are, set up nicely at wide receiver. Hopefully Hassan Reddick shows up, just adding more to that defense to complement the offensive side of the ball. Also, the new pieces on the offensive line, bringing over Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, and John Simpson. A great roster, really, overall, from top to bottom. Just have to stay healthy. And if he's able to bring the Jets back to the playoffs, maybe win the division, that's very possible. This award will pretty much be his by the time that they make the playoffs or anything like that. I think he is definitely the front runner and an easy pick for this award. So we'll move on to the other award, which I thought it should be Dan Quinn. I like Dan Quinn for the Washington Commanders for a few reasons. Just because I am high on the Commanders overall as a team, I think it's hard to really buy into them because of the recent actions, the production we've seen over the last few years with the carousel of quarterbacks that they've rotated through. The roster just being all right in some areas, but not too well everywhere else. Now, Jaden Daniels is a big part of that, but also Dan Quinn. The idea that he brings in, the culture that he wants to set there with the Commanders, I think is going to be huge. He had a huge success as the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys, so he's very familiar already with that division, with all those teams, and that on top of, bringing in Jaden Daniels, revamping this entire roster, I think it is set up very nicely. And I did have the Commanders finishing second in my predictions, the standing predictions for the NFC East. So if I'm going with that, the Commanders are going to be pretty decent this year. And if they do fall at second, they're going to have a chance there to make the playoffs. So if they're anywhere there in my predictions, anywhere around potentially making the playoffs, I think this award should go to Dan Quinn. But there's also good shouts out there. Raheem Morris is another one. Mike McDonald in Seattle is a great one as well. Brian Callahan potentially in Tennessee. But I like Dan Quinn. I think people are sleeping on the Commanders, and if they do overachieve and make the playoffs, then I think he should be the heavy favorite by leading this group in any sort of playoff push towards the end of the year. Then, moving on to our next award, Offensive Rookie of the Year. I wanted to throw in another name on here, but I think it really just comes down to Caleb or Jaden Daniels, just going off of the last topic with Dan Quinn. It's going to be close, I think, mainly between these two. It usually goes to one of the quarterbacks, and this quarterback class is arguably one of the best ones in NFL history. So Caleb, I think with how great he's going to be, because he is going to be fantastic there with the Bears, how they've surrounded him, all the pieces that he has, I think he's going to do enough, and he's going to turn it on quickly enough for everybody to realize that this Bears team is for real this year. They aren't messing around. You saw it in just the offseason with how they improved their roster. Their defense is heavily slept on. Give me Caleb Williams for the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Then the second to last one here, Defensive Rookie of the Year. I like Quinyon Mitchell. I like him a lot coming out of Toledo. And the fact that the Eagles stole him at pick 20 or 21, something around those lines. He's not technically starting yet, because I consider starting being one of the outside spots. And I think right now he's projected to be their starting slot corner right now. But he's going to be starting for them on the outside towards the end of the year. He's going to be in that position to succeed alongside Darius Slay. He's that talented, and again, something much needed for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's going to turn a lot of heads. He already has been at training camp, going up against A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and all those guys, leaving that interaction, that battle, pretty impressed with the young player, the young defensive back. So I think he's set up very nicely here. Vic Fangio coming in as his coach, having that experience in there from a coaching standpoint. I like Quinyon Mitchell a lot to really help turn that secondary around for the Philadelphia Eagles after last year. And then the most important one, the MVP award. You could go Lamar again. You could go Patrick again. But we're hopping on the bandwagon. We're hopping on the Jordan Love bandwagon. I think it is a bandwagon now, just because I feel like a lot of people are making this pick become Jordan Love. I think more and more this is becoming the popular pick, and I'm buying in on Jordan Love. Not expecting at all the performance that he put on in the playoffs last year, to walk into Dallas, step on that star, drop 3 touchdowns on their head, almost 50 points, and then go to San Francisco and almost beat the 49ers as well. This team got better with Josh Jacobs. They just another year with Matt LaFleur there. Development for Jordan Love. It's not really about the talents, because Jordan Love does have the arm talent and everything like that. I think it's more so about those moments that you get into in the playoffs where Jordan just doesn't seem to blink. He knows, he has such a calm demeanor, it looks like, when you look through his face mask in any play during that Cowboys game, that everything that he does is just like just business. He's just doing everything like a robot, like it's automatic with him. And that's one of the big things that I look at when you're trying to get a difference from some of these great quarterbacks, because there are so many now in the NFL. When you see that type of character, that type of demeanor, calmness through the storm, I saw that out of Jordan Love last year. I think he's only going to continue that this year. We're just going to see it now more in the regular season, and more as the year goes on. I think Jordan Love will show everyone that he is deserving of that $55 million contract that he got per year. One of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. I think he's going to validate that very much so in 2024. So that wraps it up for the season awards. Just one day out from the start of the NFL regular season. Those are my picks. We're going to come back to it when the season does end, or halfway through the season. We'll have an updated one and see how many of my picks I've gone back on at that point in time. But that's what I'm going with right now. Let me know what you guys think about it. If I'm sleeping on anybody, if one of my picks is just insane, leave it in the comment section or in the live chat box as well. But we have 2 more topics to get to leading into our next break. We're going to talk about the Giants and their head coach Brian Daboll and their general manager Joe Schoen. Are both of them on the hot seat in 2024 if the Giants stink up the joint once again? And also the final rendition of our predictions for these divisional standings. We're going to talk about the AFC South. Not the last one. We still have the AFC West. That's my mistake. But we're going to talk about the AFC South and predicting the final standings in that division. It should be a good one. One of the ones I'm looking forward to the most. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with both of those topics when we return.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back now quickly into this next segment, talking about one of the teams in the NFC East, the New York Giants, which I feel like the spirits aren't too high right now with the Giants, unfortunately. And with that being the case, with so much pressure, I think coming from the outside media and also the fan base, right, not wanting to repeat, obviously, what they saw last year, this is going to be a big year. This is going to be a big year for a couple reasons that I will get into as we go through this segment. But usually that pressure, when you think of who to put it on, most of it goes to Daniel Jones, right? Rightly so, unfairly. You guys be the judge of that. But I think most of it does go to Daniel Jones, right? The volume does favor Daniel Jones more often than not. And some cases I've been on here, criticizing Daniel Jones for the decision making and just the poor quarterback play. But other times, it could just be down to other prior decisions that were made with the roster, the game planning and everything that, potentially put Daniel Jones, just this entire team, in a bad position. So you can win if nobody, or if more than a couple people aren't on the same page. It's so hard to win in the NFL, obviously. Every team is so talented that when you have miscommunications or a lapse in judgment or just bad decision-making, undisciplined a lot of the times, this is what happens. This is how you get the seasons that the Giants unfortunately have had over the last few years. So with that being the case, now there has been talk about not only Daniel Jones, right, moving on this year if things go south, but potentially their head coach and their general manager, Joe Schoen, potentially following Daniel Jones right out that door. And SNY insider Connor Hughes was the one that reported on what he's hearing about the security around Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll going into this year. Connor Hughes mentioned that the Giants are not actively right now trying to fire Brian Daboll. They are not evaluating him as being on the hot seat as of this moment. Owner John Mara believes that Brian Daboll is suited for this job. He wants to give him a chance to show some growth, show some improvement from a disappointing year in 2023. But that doesn't mean that Brian Daboll is still not feeling the pressure on his own. Reportedly, Brian Daboll isn't naive to the fact that there is pressure this year. Connor Hughes goes on to say, I heard from several sources this offseason that Brian Daboll was openly telling people he knows what could happen if things go south. That's among the reasons he took the play calling duties back. He's not getting fired with someone else calling his offense. And if you guys weren't aware, it's not going to be Kafka calling the plays for the Giants this year. It is going to be Brian Daboll, like Connor Hughes said. And that, run of action, that run of events does show you that, Brian Daboll, he's not just going to sit around and pretend like he's not on the hot seat, right? Each and every year is huge for these NFL teams, right? You can't have, let alone just a couple of bad losing seasons, to be on the stretch that the Giants have been on. It's unacceptable, and obviously Brian Daboll knows how this business works. He knows how winning is ultimately the biggest factor. So he's going to take action. He has already taken action by being the play caller this year. And not only that, if you really think about it, by him calling the plays, and when someone's calling the plays, when you see everything break down in the context of everything with different camera angles and all of that, a lot of the times you can really tell, if you go back and look at the tape and everything, when it is just a bad quarterback decision, when it is just bad quarterback play, or when the offense just isn't working, right? An example last year, I watched a lot of it as a Steelers fan, the play calling, how the offense was trying to get open, was trying to operate under Matt Canada, it just wasn't working with the talented players that they do have. And the Giants do have good players, right? Malik Neighbors coming in. Wan'Dale Robinson is another one, underrated receiver for them. Jalen Hyatt as well. Slayton as well on top of that. They do have good players on their roster. And when you see the difference, when you go back and look at the videotape, the tape and everything, you can see when the offense just isn't scheming, isn't getting itself open, or when the offense is getting receivers open, but the quarterback is making the wrong reads, right? That becomes pretty evident. And by Brian Daboll now taking the responsibilities upon himself, now I think not only does that, bring some more emphasis, some more urgency, some more control for him to have a better year this year, but also preserving his job a little bit, right? Like I said, if he's calling good plays and just Daniel Jones just isn't delivering on them, it will become pretty evident, and he'll be able to salvage his job off of that. But also, talking about salvaging jobs, Connor Hughes also added that Joe Schoen isn't 100% promised the 2025 season if again, the Giants don't win some more games. Connor Hughes said, everything and anything is still on the table if this team wins just 3 or 4 games. The fans, the outside media is not happy with the makeup of this roster, and the general manager is a big part of making those decisions, contract extensions, free agency, and all of that. A lot of it falls on the general manager, right? But also, the head coach and how the organization goes about handing out contracts and all that stuff. But really, it is the general manager as the face most often than not when these decisions are being made. And I think once you saw, Hard Knocks, as much as you want to take that in terms of seriousness, how accurate those scenes were, you did see a lot of it. I saw a lot of it that I really didn't like from Joe Schoen and how they went through their evaluation and the whole thing with Saquon, obviously, now looking like this decision to extend Daniel Jones over Saquon, how it all has blown up in their face pretty much. At some point in time, you got to look at Joe Schoen and think about these decisions and whether or not you can live with them going forward. And now, with all of that being the case on Connor Hughes' report, you think about the question, are they both on the hot seat? I think they both can be on the hot seat. If you're looking at the three of them, right? Daniel Jones, Joe Schoen, and Brian Daboll. If you want to see change and you're forced to make changes after this year, if you finish last in the division again, if you win no more than 5 games or 6 games or something like that, and something has to change, my order for, having somebody leave the organization, I think number 1 would be Daniel Jones. Just because if they do finish last, I don't think it's going to be not because of Daniel Jones. So he's probably the easiest one, the most likely one to move on from in 2025. So he would be number 1 to go. And then I would actually consider moving on from Joe Schoen second, and Brian Daboll the least likely for me to move on from after this year if, again, they don't have a successful season. I just feel like Brian Daboll could seem like one of the easier ones to fire, right? When a team has a bad year, usually the head coach and the quarterback are the ones to leave, right? But I think just how the resume kind of speaks for Brian Daboll, helping Josh Allen develop and turn around back in 2022, or excuse me, not 2022, before that, before he was hired by the Giants, the development of Josh Allen. And then in 2022, you had that playoff appearance and getting the best out of Daniel Jones in that year. I think that's something you can work with. I really do believe that's something you can salvage there. It looks like their owner, John Mara, also believes that by talking about Brian Daboll and still having confidence in him. All that other stuff about the chemistry, the interactions with the other coaching staff, yeah, it's concerning, but just talking about Brian Daboll in this context with these other guys, I think I would salvage him. If I had to save one of them, it would be Brian Daboll, because again, I'm not too big of a fan of how Joe Schoen and the front office and just that entire team handled the Saquon Barkley situation, free agency just in general. Daniel Jones' contract, obviously handing out that extension, while that is a organizational decision, right, with the owners, the coach, and everybody. When you bring in also Saquon and free agency and just seeing it in Hard Knocks, a little bit of it, it just doesn't fill me with confidence that we couldn't see more of these decisions yet again. Now that he has brought in, Brian Burns and I'm forgetting the safety. His name's escaping me, but the defense is looking solid. You bring in Brian Burns as one of your biggest free agent acquisitions. You brought in some also pieces on the offensive line, so he has done some good things. But overall, if I had to pick one, I don't want to move on from Brian Daboll. And if you think about it, big picture and everything, this team to me can't restart and knock down the entire thing once again and say fire 2 out of the 3 of these guys, because if you reset everything, you have to go and look for a new head coach. maybe a new general manager if you get rid of him, a new quarterback. That's the last thing you want to do, so you're going to have to preserve one of them. I think Brian Daboll would be that guy for me to have that clear idea of going to the organization, going to maybe a new general manager and saying, look, these are the players that I need. This is obviously the system I'm trying to run. I need these players here. This is the idea. I think we can be successful with these guys. I also need this quarterback in the draft or in free agency or whatever to be successful. And to me, that's one of the better outcomes for the Giants after this year, barring that they do finish with a bad record. If they do that yet again, then I think you look to keeping Brian Daboll and moving on from the other two. That's just me. It is a hot seat technically, but I wouldn't get rid of him as the most likely candidate to leave if I'm the New York Giants. I think Daniel Jones definitely is the main candidate, but Joe Schoen should be above Brian Daboll in the cut order, the release order, if you will, for any decisions that need to be made by the Giants. But let me know what you guys think about that and the entire situation with the Giants. I'm very interested to know what you guys think. But we do have one more segment to get to, talking about the divisional standings, my predictions for how the AFC South is going to finish. The Colts, the Titans, the Jaguars, and the Houston Texans. A lot of change in this division. We're going to try and predict it to the best of our abilities right after this break. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, going over some more standing predictions in each division, this time stopping in the AFC South, and predicting how these teams are going to finish, right? Because this one is a division that I'm very much looking forward to watching. A lot of these teams, a lot of them changed their head coach, a lot of the weapons, their offenses, their entire rosters. I think it's going to be super competitive this year with all of these teams, which made it exciting but also very hard to predict the order of how they were going to end up after the 2024 regular season. But I tried my best here to try and provide you guys with the most accurate predictions. So with that being the case, at number 4, I have the Indianapolis Colts finishing last this year. I just feel like there's a lot of youth in this team. Anthony Richardson trying to come back and play a full season, after being very limited last year. And I think going back to college, you guys can correct me on the stat, but I think the amount of times that he started over the last couple of years from college to the NFL, it hasn't been that many. I can't throw out a random number because I just honestly don't know it, but it hasn't been a lot of starts in that time period for Anthony Richardson. And now navigating through a whole NFL season and competing with these teams, I think they're just a year early from doing that. I'd like to see a whole year with Anthony Richardson. They are fortunate to have the easiest schedule in the AFC South along with the Tennessee Titans, but that's one of the main reasons I think they still will finish 4th, because of them overall being very young. Not just Anthony Richardson, but some of the playmakers that they have. Also, their first round pick this year, Laiatu Latu. He could be looked upon right away to make an important jump into their defense right away to contribute. Now with Samson Ebukam placed on the IR to start, he's going to miss the first 4 weeks, so you need some pass rush. He was your leading sack artist last year, so to not have him to start the year is a big miss, and they're going to play the Houston Texans right off of the bat. That's going to be a big game with the implications in the division and also that mini rivalry that they have going on. That's going to be interesting to watch, and how much, their first round rookie pick, obviously, right, can contribute right away. And also, outside of their typical stars like Kenny Moore, Julian Blackmon in the secondary, the other players, opposite of those guys, I still have questions about. And I think it's just really a matter of getting more reps for this team, more experience together, right? Staying healthy, learning what you need to learn this year, and taking that into next year. They're going to be competitive. I don't think anyone's going to get blown out this year in this division, but someone has to finish last, and I feel like it's going to be the Indianapolis Colts. Then at number 3, with all their change, all the turnaround with their team, I have the Titans finishing 3rd. It was tough between them and second place because I really like all the changes that they made. I'm sure you guys have noticed that with me talking about it. The addition of Brian Callahan, all the players on offense and especially on defense as well. The roster on paper looks great. Looks like you have in every spot a very capable player. Maybe just outside of some spots on the offensive line, or middle linebacker or something like that. But really, you look at secondary, their defensive line is also another one that I will point out, having some doubts about it. But wide receiver, running back, quarterback, they have good players that showed a lot of promise for the young ones last year. So I really like those additions in compromise with Brian Callahan, bringing over his ideas, how successful his offense was with the Cincinnati Bengals. They have some of that aspect here in terms of offensive firepower with Tyler Boyd, being familiar with his system. Also, I don't have to say much about DeAndre Hopkins, right? Calvin Ridley coming off of a 1,000-yard season. They have, again, tied for the easiest schedule with the Colts, so I think that'll do them a lot of favors, and being pretty competitive in terms of wins and losses with a easier schedule than some of these other teams. They have all this potential, but the biggest thing that I'm now remembering is that this team did finish last year. So as much as I am a fan of all these additions, to make that jump from last to second just in a matter of months, I think that's a big ask. That's a big jump to make right away. I could be proven wrong. They could make that jump. I think they're capable of doing it, but I think I'd play it safe, and I feel like 3rd is a good spot for the Tennessee Titans. They showed some great signs last year, especially Will Levis, but he's now having to learn a whole new offense just in his second year. How easy does he make that transition, and how smooth does it go over with him and this team, trying to lead this team into any sort of playoff contention. So making that jump from last to second, I couldn't get myself to do it. So the Titans will finish 3rd this year. And then at number 2, pretty obvious because they're not going to finish 1. It's going to be the Jaguars at number 2. The loss of Calvin Ridley hurts, especially to the Titans, just in the division, is a treacherous act if you're on the wrong side of it. But, that's what the Jaguars have to deal with now. The pressure on Trevor Lawrence, obviously having pressure as a number 1 overall pick. But I think more so, a lot of people talk about his contract, being the highest paid quarterback, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. Still not really seeing that performance or a string of performances that really make you believe that he's up there with the other young quarterbacks, right? Like CJ. I think CJ, some people might have CJ Stroud ahead of Trevor Lawrence at this point, and he's played 1 year. And I don't like that narrative, right, for Trevor Lawrence because he hasn't produced those moments like CJ Stroud has, in my opinion. So having that, coming into this year with that, trying to validate that contract, prove all the haters wrong, per se. And also, a lot of people forget that this team, as much as I have my doubts about them, with Trevor being one of them, and just overall losing Calvin Ridley, their secondary, their linebackers potentially, they were the number one team in the AFC to start the year last year. They were right up there with, I forget the record that they had. They might have been like 6-1 or something at one point, or something like that by week 5 or 6 or anything like that. But they were the number one team to start the year. They had a great start, but then obviously the wheels fell off. That sort of sign from a young team, an inexperienced team. Trevor got hurt. Travis Etienne got hurt as well. A little bit unlucky in that, but a collapse nonetheless. So this team showed you that they are capable of being up there, and we didn't know what the Texans were going to be. Now we have a pretty clear idea of that, right? So maybe that's going to affect them competing right away for that number one seed. But, they have the potential there. Their defensive line is something that I really like. Probably the best thing about this team is their offensive line with Josh Allen-Hines, Eric Armstead, Trayvon Walker. Those three guys just on that defensive line is up there with one of the best in the entire NFL, with how, Josh Allen-Hines finished last year among the best in terms of sacks, the potential of Trayvon Walker, and Eric Armstead, a very underrated pass rusher and defensive tackle in the NFL. So I like that. I like the addition of Darnell Savage as well to this secondary, but they did lose one of their best corners in Darius Williams. So there are some good, there's some bad with the Jaguars. I'm a little bit iffy. That's why I thought it was so close with the Tennessee Titans, but the Titans did finish last, and the Jaguars have shown me that potential a little bit. So this is as high as the Jaguars or any of these teams were going to go, because number one has to be the Houston Texans. It just has to. What can you say other than just looking at their roster? Arguably one of the best in the NFL. Made it to the divisional round last year before they added Danielle Hunter, Joe Mixon, Stefon Diggs, and all these guys. And now another year for Will Anderson to learn from Danielle Hunter. Christian Harris, another one of their best players, made a lot of big-time plays last year. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he got hurt in that game against the Baltimore Ravens. And he was doing a great job of covering, being a spy on Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying like the Texans could have beat them outright right away, but if Christian Harris stayed in that game fully healthy, I don't know, like maybe he would have finished that game out. The Ravens could have struggled, and then the Texans could have been in the AFC Championship game without any of these new additions. But he's one that I don't think gets enough credit for what he does. I really like him. Also, Jalen Petrie, another underrated young player that they have. Derek Stingley is looking more and more like one of the best corners in the game. Look out for him this year, putting his name up there with all these young cornerbacks that we have now. Pat Surtain just got paid today. Sauce Gardner's up next. Derek Stingley could be making that jump into that sort of range in terms of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. And last year they had a rookie head coach as well and a rookie quarterback leading this team, and they got that far. So adding all this experience, the experience that these young players have now, I don't see how they fall any lower than this, honestly. They do have one of the toughest schedules in the NFL and the hardest schedule in this division. How do they handle, the expectations and everything like that? But the talent does get you over a lot of these games, right? If you're just more talented than the other team, and they have good play calling, good coaching as well, that's going to be enough when you're trying to make the difference against the Ravens or these other good teams that they play. I don't have their schedule in front of me. It seems like they have everything, barring any injuries or anything like that. They should be up there winning this division for sure, but up there, I wouldn't be surprised as a potential number one seeded team in the AFC. That's how much confidence I have in them. But that's pretty much it. That'll wrap up the standings, my predictions for how the AFC South is going to finish, but also that's going to wrap up today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, for more NFL content in a variety of different ways with this show on both of those channels. And lastly, if you want to see more of these live shows, check out every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga, every day talking about these NFL storylines on the show. So we'll be back tomorrow covering the Kansas City Chiefs game and the Baltimore Ravens. The official start of the regular season is tomorrow. I'm looking forward to talking with you guys more about that when we're on here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't